So the morning of April 16th was like any other morning. Christian is a senior in high school, and I'm getting up, I'm getting ready, I'm drinking my coffee, and I go to his room, and he is not in his bed. So I look on Find My Friends on the phone, and it looks like he's in Houston. I'm like, what? So I call his dad, who's already at work in Houston, and we start following you know, where his phone is going, and it brings us to this detective homicide place. And it was so scary. After several hours and not getting any answers, and them telling us to go home and call Baytown police and have them do a missing persons, we finally found out that he was shot, and he's at Memorial Hermann. So that was the ride of our lives, driving up there. We get up there, it's probably about 10 a.m. and they let us into his room, and we found out, you know, that he had got shot in his face, that it went through his brain. And he was just his head was shaved in the bed. He had tubes everywhere, in his mouth, in his arms. He had a wrapped head. And I just went to his side, and we were both, you know, letting him know that we're there. Whew, and then the journey begins. So basically what had happened is okay, basically, so the parent of that home called 911 where he was at. We were lucky to have EMS right next to them, like 2 blocks away, and they came and started treating Christian. He was immediately life-flighted from Highlands to Memorial Hermann in Houston, and there he went straight to surgery and had what's called a craniectomy, where they removed his skull, about this big of a portion. They removed it so that his brain would have ample room to swell, because it has had a traumatic injury and it has to swell. If they would have kept his skull on, it would have swollen and caused major damage all throughout his brain, because there wouldn't have been enough oxygen supply. So when we looked at him, he looked like he had a perfect little round head, just like normal. But however, that was major swelling. That was his actual brain puffing up that much to fill the space. The next days were super critical to his survival. He was battling ICP pressure, which is intracranial pressure. A machine was breathing for him, and they had to give him, I don't know what they're called, rather than pain test, where they're doing different things, where they're pinching his muscle and trying to get him to do a certain reaction. They're opening his eyes, doing pupil checks, and basically what happened was he couldn't keep his pressures under control. So they gave him what's called a Zoll catheter, and that brings his body temperature extremely low, like cryotherapy. And it's basically acts on his brain the same way that you would think of after you get bruised or something, that you would put an ice pack on it to decrease the swelling. So his whole body to the core was very cold, with degrees in Celsius in the low 30s, high 20s. I didn't write that down, but I did write something down, and it is that I started a blog, so I was able to document every single day what was going on. I had prayer warriors all over. My church family was so important, my husband and Christian's church family, and anyway, I had it printed, and it's very useful so I was able to, like, every single day what was going on. This is all documented so that Christian, all those days that he missed and it was out of it, he'll know, he'll get to, you know, read and see what happened while he was battling for his life. But, you know, Christian did not get to go home until day 45 from April 16th. And while he was there, it was a day-by-day battle. Doctors could not give us any answers because all brain injuries are different. They could not tell us anything. We relied on prayer alone because there was nothing that we could do. But his ICP pressure was constantly in the battle. He had to get a tracheotomy where he was able to breathe because you can't keep the tube down somebody's throat for months on end. So they cut his neck right there and inserted a tube so that he could breathe. They also inserted a PEG tube so he could eat because, you know, they can't always give IV nutrition. You have to eventually try to get it straight to the stomach. It's just not good for your veins for that long. So he had that, and throughout the next few days, the criteria to get out of that main most critical floor was 3 things. 1, to maintain his body temperature without that Zoll catheter, you know, on his own, because it's like your body has its own mind and your brain actually controls everything. So his body had to maintain the right temperature. He had to be able to breathe on his own, and his intracranial pressures had to remain low without any medication. And talking about medications, one time one of the nurses told me all of the different medications he was on, and it was on a piece of typing paper. One, it was like listed all the way down for a column and a half. That's how many he had. But there were things like paralytics. There were things like vasopressors, and of course things to help him relax, you know. And gosh, I just can't go on with it, however many medications there were. But he had many tests too, tests as well. They found a lot of a very big damage on one of his major vessels inside of his brain. And so that of course was always a worry of blood clots. He was given blood thinners, of course. And anyway, I think it was, let's see, day 8, he opened his eyes on his own, and that was amazing. But every time they gave him those pain tests and stuff, he would react, but he would never follow commands. If it was, give me a thumbs up, if it was, you know, raise your left arm, he never would mind them. So we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know if he would ever be able to talk again, walk again, if he could ever understand anything. We did not know anything. But eventually, through prayer and diligence and just battling through that horrible time, we were able to move him on to ICU. And at ICU, they started bringing in some physical therapists, and they started working on movement with him every day. He, when he got his trach and he began to speak at all, we were so in praise for that. His first words were Jaden. Jaden is his little brother. He called me Jaden, his dad Jaden. And, you know, Jaden is just, he's just like 12. So this is very traumatic. We decided to keep him at home and try to live life normally, because this is his big brother and he looks up to him. And I know it's a weird decision, but, you know, every family to each his own on those types of decisions. But his old brother did come and see him, and he was so much stronger than I thought he was, and he was able to be with us during those times where Christian was confused and needed restraints in the bed in order to not harm himself. Christian had to, it was like a reset. His brain was like a reset. It was like you had to, from the very first day they had him sit up in bed, it was like he was a rag doll. His little, it was like bouncing, you know, like, and it was just so scary. And I've never had to tell the story straight through, and I'm trying to keep it under 10 minutes. But, you know, every day they would add on a physical therapy a little bit. So if it was sitting up the first day, It was sitting up and putting your feet over the next day. It was sitting up, putting your feet over, standing up the next day. Then we stood up the next 4 days in a row. And the next day, the next time we would have, you know, help, all of the people would help him walk to a chair about 3 feet away and sit down. You know, all of these times, every time he stood up, he'd have to wear this helmet because at this point, his little head has sunken in because his pressures are under control. So, so in order for him to be discharged from that next part and moved on to tier inpatient, which is more of a physical therapy hospital, he had to be able to be eating on his own and be able to not need any breathing treatments or, you know, to get his trach removed, basically. So he had to work through getting through all of those goals and working with the physical therapy every day. You know, he got shot in the left side of his brain, so the right side of his body was very weak, much weaker. In fact, we were afraid it might even be paralyzed. So he had to work in strength for that side to even be able to walk and move his right arm and stuff. So we finally got transferred over to tier, and you know, that's a wonderful place. From a hospital to a rehabilitation hospital, that is wonderful for families, because at hospitals they focus on basically medication for treatment. At a rehabilitation, they focus on you working for yourself to move on and live in life. So they work on real goals that are attainable, like brushing your teeth, like getting up and taking a shower. All of these things, every single step is so important. We take it for granted that we're able to do the things that we do, but when you have a traumatic brain injury, you wouldn't believe how many things that we take for granted that we're able to do. So he had to relearn everything. Then it started to come into context of about where the injury and what area of the brain it took place. And I'm going to show a picture. So it hit an area called the Broca, B-R-O-C-A, Broca Center, and that's for language. And if you can imagine everything that you've learned from kindergarten all through every year in English, all of that disappeared. And so he had to relearn every symbol of every letter of the alphabet, relearn how to read, relearn how to write, and speaking was so hard. He even had his opposites wrong, like he would call me a him and Dad a her. And he had lots of simple words that he couldn't say at all, like bathtub, it would be tap-tub. You know, it was just so hard, so much practice to get to where he is today. Wow, today you almost can't even tell that he has a speech impediment. But anyway, so let's see. We were able to get out of tier right in time. And by the way, I had got an HISD teacher to come to tier, and I worked really hard through the high-ups in GCCISD to make sure Christian will get to graduate with his class. So he did. He came home right in time to graduate, y'all, with his class, and he walked by himself. He had to wear his helmet, and I covered it in red so it would match, but that is all praise to him is all I can say. So he graduates, and then we work to get him into an outpatient rehabilitation center. That's where we drive back and forth, and the best one we found at that time was at Galveston. It was called TLC, the Learning Center, and it was kind of a program where he would go just like you're going to school, but several therapists, and there was a schedule, and he'd have to work through each of their goals, trying to get better at speaking, trying to get better at reading and writing, and just activities of daily living, all of those things. All of the while, he is taking blood thinners so that he doesn't get a blood clot and die instantly, you know. So we're having to, you know, drive all over the place every day, but once a week he would get his blood checked to make sure that it was thin enough. And we were waiting and waiting till the day till he gets his skull back, you know. That ended up happening in August, which was 4 months after the day he got shot, and it's called a craniotomy. I'm sorry, cranioplasty. And what they did was find, they took this image of his head and they sent it to Germany, who created a 3D map of what this new plate should look like. By the way, he wanted his old skull back, and we thought that they had it in the freezer, was what they told us, but it ends up that when you get shot, at any point, they will not put it back on your head, your own, because there's too much risk for infection. If one little sliver of the piece of bullet would have touched the inside of the skull, it's dirty, and you're not going to put something dirty back onto your brain. Then you have a brain infection and you die anyway. So no, we'll go ahead and get this brand new sterile piece that's homemade to fit right where he's supposed to have it. Well, I'm always pointing to the right, but it's the left. So he got his skull piece. We were so happy with that. He no longer had to wear that horrible helmet. He hated that helmet. Who wouldn't? Especially being 18, right? So he's got his, you know, everything's going well. He's continuing to go to therapy in Galveston, and then we were hoping to get off those blood thinners, so we had to take one of those tests. It's called a CTV. It's where they put dye inside your head while it's through your vein, and then they'll take a picture of your brain, and they'll be able to see all the blood vessels. And we needed that in order to show the neurosurgeon that he no longer has any blood clots in his vein, to get off those blood thinners. That's, you know, I had to give him shots too. It was just horrible, all the stuff we had to go through. But basically, he also developed a deep vein thrombosis in his leg, and you know, as well as infections in his lung, because when you're laying in bed and not moving, so much can happen, like deep vein thrombosis and just pneumonia. So he was treated constantly all this time, and now we're at the point where we're able to try to show those surgeons, hey, we're good, let's get off the blood thinner. There was a mistake made by a medical people. She thought she had got the dye in his vein, and she went to go take the picture. Not the dye. She was putting an IV in. She thought she had it in the vein, and it was not in the vein. And they went and did the scan, and the machine tells him to be still and not move and not say a word while it gives a bolus of the dye. And it pushed into his good arm, the arm that he finally got recovered. It pushed into there and causing him so much pain. It was excruciating, and I was one mad mama. It was horrible, lots of tears. Long story short, we went to another place, got a great exam, showed the neurosurgeon, and we finally got off blood thinners. Then he's working and finished up at TLC in 4 months, and then we moved on to a new place, which is the TIER off Kirby Glen. It's another section for TIER, but it's an outpatient rehab, and he's currently in that program now. And one of the goals was to begin driving again. He had to go through a middleman that it's called, what is it called? Okay, it was Stromat. He had to have somebody drive with him, the same kind that when you take driving school and they have a brake on the passenger side, so that they could evaluate his skills in driving. He had to go through them a couple of times, and then they went with him to DPS in Houston, and he went with a real officer and did a comprehensive evaluation, not just your normal driving behind the wheel. It was like 45 minutes long instead of 15. So he earned his driver's license in December, yay. And so now he's got freedom to drive when he wants to. Now his next goal is to get to a point where he can go to college. So They're working on his speaking skills still, and his reading and reading comprehension and his writing. He's got many exercises to do, like a journal where he needs to write about 2 to 3 sentences a day. He's working on it, working hard. And one last thing, one complication that still remains is a post-op complication, and it's called, he has what's called a pneumomeningocele, which is a fake, that's what pneumo is. It's a fake pocket of CSF fluid. So cerebral spinal fluid is going through his dura and pocketing itself right there at his left temple. So if you touch it right now, it will kind of be like a waterbed. And it's there's a way to fix it, but it involves surgery with the same kind of skin flap taken over. So much risk for infection. So fortunately, the neurosurgeon said, you know, let's let Mother Nature do its course and it'll eventually go away. What's weird about it is that he'll have this pocket of fluid early in the morning when he wakes up. But say if he went walking or did any kind of exercises, that fluid goes back inside where, you know, it covers the brain and protects it. And still, his brain still is protected, even if it comes out through to his skin. But anyway, it'll go through, and then it'll spontaneously resolve on its own eventually. We're just waiting for that to happen still. But what I was saying is when he exercises, it kind of sinks back into his head, and so he has kind of a smaller indentation. Another complication is the temporal muscle. It's naturally always attached to the top of your skull. So if you remove the skull, that muscle has nothing to attach to, and for 4 months just sat there and did nothing, had no way to exercise. So that muscle atrophied. And when they put the new skull piece back on and they pulled the muscle back up, it wouldn't go all the way back up to the top. So now it kind of is shortened. And so he has a little bit, I mean, you have to really look for it, but he has like a little bit of it goes in a little and kind of a little bump. So it's cosmetic. He doesn't mind. I don't know that because I'm not Christian, and I'm sure that everything matters to him. But anyway, we're still going through this, and we're not even a year since it happened in April. Right now is February. So anyway, I do want to say that I give all the credit to Jesus Christ. He's our God, and he saved Christian, and he let us keep our son. And of course, I'm not downplaying any of the medical people. All of the brilliant surgeons everywhere, from EMS to Lifeline to just everyone that put a hand of care on him. They were wonderful and brilliant, and I adore them for their education that they gained. But when it all comes down to it, who made these people and who gave them their gifts, right? So anyway, I hope you guys have a lovely rest of the year, and good luck with your nursing career.
So the day that happened, I remember I was sitting on a video game chair, and I was playing video games with 2 of my friends, and I saw what happened, like, as soon as I got shot, I was face down and looking at the ceiling, and I couldn't move, and I was very relaxed, and I was not in pain. I was not in pain, and I saw 2 of my friends run out. Well, first they looked at me and they saw what happened, and they ran to tell their parents.